Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carrie Burke, your moderator for today's webinar, Unifying Security Requirements and Vulnerability Management for Applications. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation via the Q&A chat feature. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Dan Cornell, a globally recognized application security expert who holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As Chief Technology Officer and Principal at Denim Group, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process. Presenting alongside Dan, we have Shane Parfit. Shane is a product marketing manager at Security Compass, working on the company's flagship security requirements management product, SDLC 4. With more than 10 years of experience in product management and marketing, Shane has led numerous campaigns developing, educating, and promoting the benefits of innovative technologies in graphics, display, multimedia, and security.
Thanks, Carrie. All right, apologize for the audio problems before. Shane, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Music to my ears. All right. Well, good. Well, we're excited to have Shane here today. We've done a number of these webinars with ThreadFix and other partners that we integrate with, and a lot of the times we're talking with different integration partners on the testing side, so different static analysis vendors, dynamic analysis vendors. I'm really excited for our webinar today because we're going to be talking about the things that you can do with SD elements when combined with ThreadFix. And so we're going to be talking about managing security requirements and managing vulnerabilities. And so this is a little bit of a different character of integration than we've talked about before. And again, Shane, thrilled to have you here today. Really appreciate you coming on.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
All right. So from an agenda standpoint, we're going to talk just a little bit about the state of application security. And then Shane's going to tell us about why it's critical that you manage security requirements. After that, he'll provide an overview of SDLC 4 and talk a little bit about how it works and the business value. Then I'll talk a bit about ThreadFix and how organizations are using ThreadFix to manage their application vulnerabilities and manage those through to resolution. And then we're going to talk a bit about the value in combining ThreadFix and SD elements, mechanically how that integration works, as well as talking about the value that you see by using these two products together. So now we'll turn it over to Shane to learn about why you want to manage security requirements.
Sure, thank you. So we'll move on to the first slide. As Carrie said at the top of the presentation, I work for Security Compass on our product SDLC 4. Now what SDLC is a security requirements management product that aims to help organizations address vulnerabilities and weaknesses earlier in the software development lifecycle. Now what we have pictured here, although there are many software development methodologies, they generally boil down to kind of these three steps of requirements, design, development, testing, and release. And the security testing tools, or scanner tools as they're commonly referred to, they're very good at finding vulnerabilities, at the later stages of the development process, and they're very important to use. DAST tools at the testing and release phase, and code review tools, SAS tools, start using at the development phase. What SDLC tries to do is to address the vulnerabilities even earlier in the software development lifecycle. Shift left is a term I hear quite often, and to do that through the management of security requirements. So you're starting to think about these vulnerabilities before the software development even begins at the requirements and design stages. And why do this? We have some data here from IBM, and the Software Engineering Institute has similar data, but it's very well established that when the earlier you address vulnerabilities in the software development lifecycle, the lower the cost is to remediate the vulnerabilities. So when you find a vulnerability, after release, for example, it can be very expensive to go back and fix the product. Sometimes things need to be re-architected to address a vulnerability. So when you start thinking about these things earlier on in the process, it's much more cost effective to do this, and in addition to having more secure products and the final result. So we'll talk about SD Elements and how SD Elements tries to do this, to shift left for addressing vulnerabilities in the security or in the software development process. So we basically do that in 5 steps that are generally aligned with the steps of the software development process. So I'll go through those steps quickly now. The first step is modeling the application. So we have a short questionnaire at the beginning of the process. And what that does is someone with knowledge about the product and the requirements will go in and fill in a questionnaire that answers questions about the language, platform, various technologies used, whether it's a database, and the compliance requirements for the project. So that takes about 15 minutes to model the application in SD Elements. And the result of that is we have a large database of security requirements, and the result of the questionnaire and the survey is that we pick out from that database, we generate the list of relevant threats and countermeasures. So there's a long list of threats that are associated with the products, and so those are the security requirements. And within those requirements, the threats, we have a lot of information, the countermeasures, how to mitigate those risks in the application. So it's threats and countermeasures that we have in our database that are generated as a result of the questionnaire. And then once you have the list of tasks that are required to secure a project, we deliver those to the developers. So we have our own set of integrations that integrate with development tools, so we can push those requirements right to developers through the tools that they normally use, so they don't have to change their development process. So we have integrations with Jira, HPALM, Rational, TFS, all the usual suspects when it comes to ALM tools. We can push those requirements right into the development tools, and we have flexible field mapping where even the task content, the how-tos, which teach developers how to do it, can also be pushed into those ALM tools. And there's a kind of a visual of the integrations that we support on the ALM side. The next step is building security in. As I said, the tasks get pushed to developers, and within the task content, within the requirement, we have those a lot of help for developers, so they don't have to go searching on the internet, don't have to go searching Stack Exchange for how to solve these vulnerabilities. We give them background on the product, description of the solution, and even code samples about how to address and mitigate these vulnerabilities. And the final step is to verify requirements. So we have another set of integrations with popular scanning tools, and this is where the ThreadFix integration comes in for us. We can import the results and data from ThreadFix, and requirement by requirement, if there's a mapping, we can make sure that is marked and tracked within SD Elements, whether it's fail, partial pass, or full pass. So it gives managers a lot of visibility in the state of their project and how far they are along on creating or completing all the requirements towards security. So we'll go into the actual ThreadFix integration after Dan speaks, but just a quick word on business value before we turn it over. The reason our customers like to use SD Elements, number one is that it's costly, or it's cost effective for them to manage security requirements. One case study we did with Forrester that can be downloaded from our website found that with a large financial institution, the ROI of using SD Elements was about 118%. And where most of the ROI came from was in the vulnerability reduction. So generally, it's known within an organization the cost to remediate a vulnerability, whether it's a high vulnerability or a critical vulnerability or medium vulnerability. And so when you have fewer findings at the development or at the release stage, fewer vulnerabilities found via scanning tools, your cost goes down. This is a set of data that we got from customers where they surveyed some applications that were not onboarded into SDE versus a similar set of applications that were onboarded within SDE, and the difference was stark. There's much fewer vulnerabilities found or findings at the release stage, which translates directly to cost. Also the benefit or the business value is risk reduction. You end up with more secure applications by identifying, mitigating, and validating the risks and tracking that and managing that with SD elements. One anecdote for us was, a large ISV client of ours. They had tried to build a tool similar to SD elements internally and failed a couple times, and they decided to adopt SD elements and realized the efficiencies almost immediately. They had a process where they had their own requirements database, and for every application they would have to, do this long process of going through the database, figuring out which requirements applied to the application before they could move forward with the list of threats and requirements for each app. Automating that in SD elements with the smart profiling and the project survey reduced that task from 1 or 2 weeks down to less than an hour. So that also translated directly to cost savings and also efficiency savings. They can move forward with their product faster and improve the time to market. So that's a note on business value, and I will hand it over to Dan to talk about ThreadFix.
Thanks, Shane. And I think folks have been saying for a long time that the mantra has been this needs to move left in the process. You need to do security requirements because it's cheaper to fix things up front. And I think you all put together just a great usable example of how folks can actually do that. And so it's a great way to take what is certainly good advice, which is move it left in the process, and give it a very you guys have given it a very concrete implementation with y'all's stuff.
Great, thanks.
Perfect. So now we'll talk about ThreadFix. And what ThreadFix lets you do for your application security program is basically to manage all of the different assurance activities that you have in one central location so that you can manage issues through to resolution and also report metrics about what you're doing. And so to look at in very broad strokes, what we're doing is ThreadFix lets you create a consolidated view of all of the applications you have in your application portfolio, as well as the vulnerabilities that you've identified through different assurance and testing activities. Once you have all this data structured in a central location, then you can start to prioritize the decisions that you need to make for what gets fixed and when based on risk. You can also provide short-term protection for application vulnerabilities via virtual patching. And finally, you need to take these vulnerabilities that are being identified by the security teams very frequently, or the vulnerabilities that security teams care about, and you need to turn those into tasks that developers can manage in the tools that they're already using. And so similar to using SD elements to get security requirements injected into these application lifecycle management tools. Once you've done testing and identified vulnerabilities, this too is essentially security backlog that development teams need to be given responsibility for. And so in ThreadFix, you can communicate those identified vulnerabilities over as application change requests or bugs. Just to visually see how this works, again, you're doing testing with static testing, dynamic testing, interactive application security testing. You probably have, or hopefully in your organization, you have some program of manual assessments. Maybe you have third parties that are also doing testing and providing that data to you in Excel spreadsheets or something. You analyze those for false positives, and all that data gets centralized and correlated in ThreadFix, giving you a single unified view of the vulnerabilities that have been identified. From that, you can do reporting and analytics, and this is something that's very important if you want to take a quantitative view of your application security program. As I mentioned just a moment ago, you can also bundle up these vulnerabilities and package them up and send them to the defect trackers and the IDEs that developers are already using. And in addition, you can take this data that you're finding in your application security program and translate that up into GRC systems so that the executives responsible for managing and making high-level risk-based decisions can now have visibility into what you're doing in your application security program. So first, let's look at creating this consolidated view of your applications and the vulnerabilities. In ThreadFix, you can keep track of your application portfolio. So you can lay out, here are the different teams we have developing software, and here are the different applications each team is responsible for. That lets you have a centralized location of all these application assets that you can use for reporting. You can also import vulnerabilities, and so if you're doing static testing with a Fortify or a checkmarks, if you're doing dynamic testing with a web inspector and app scan, if you're doing manual testing, you can load all of these vulnerabilities into ThreadFix. And the important thing that ThreadFix does is it consolidates these vulnerabilities. It dedupes the vulnerabilities from these different data sources and gives you that single unified view. And so if you have tools that are providing overlapping coverage, or if you're doing static testing and dynamic testing for certain languages and frameworks, ThreadFix uses its hybrid analysis mapping technology to combine those results. So when you're running multiple tools or have multiple activities, you can see here's one vulnerability that I have 2 or more pieces of information about, instead of having multiple findings that overlap that need to be individually triaged. What we want to do is make this data management simple so that your security analysts spend time focused on high-value activities, not low-level data munging. Now that we've got all of the data from this testing in one centralized location, we can start to prioritize these risk decisions based on data. So you can slice and dice and look at applications to identify what vulnerabilities have I found, which applications have I found them in, and which ones do I want to fix first. Do I have compliance obligations that require me to fix certain vulnerabilities or else I get dinged by my auditors? Are there vulnerabilities in applications where those applications manage such sensitive data that those need to be prioritized first? ThreadFix takes all these data feeds and makes sense of it for you so that you can identify what do we need to fix first, what do we need to fix next, and let's be honest, realistically, what are we probably not going to get to? And that allows you to use this data to make smart decisions on where to allocate your scarce resources in your application security program. I don't know that I've ever met someone managing an application security program who felt that his team or her team was overstaffed and that they had a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing. The reality is that you're never going to be able to fix anything or fix everything, and so you've got to make really smart decisions about how you allocate remediation resources. ThreadFix lets you do that. And it gives you reporting and metrics. ThreadFix, because it is taking these data feeds from all these different testing streams and testing activities, that gives you a centralized view that you can then drill into, and it lets you take a much more quantitative view of your application security program. So instead of talking about how cross-site scripting is scary or SQL injection is scary, you can start to benchmark what you're doing in your organization versus publicly facing data sets like those that are released by Veracode or by White Hat Security. And so you can start to see for other organizations like us, here's the prevalence rate of different types of vulnerabilities, here's their remediation rate, here's the mean time to live for different types of vulnerabilities. That puts you in a position to have a much more quantitative and grown-up conversation with management, because instead of saying something is scary, you can say other organizations like us are fixing more of these vulnerabilities and they're fixing them faster. We need a better mandate from management to get these vulnerabilities fixed, or we need more resources for remediation. Once you've made decisions about what you need to fix, you can then translate these vulnerabilities that the security teams care about. You can translate them into the defects or the software change requests that the software developers care about. And that's something that we found to be very important, is development teams have made, usually made tremendous investments in their tool set. They've deployed these defect trackers. They've got the processes that go around this. Here's how we're doing our scrums. Here's how we're doing our sprints. By taking these vulnerabilities and packaging them up in a way that's going to be most consumable by the development teams, you take friction out of the remediation process. And whether this is done in ThreadFix or through some other means, this is one of the things that we've found in our experience, both with ThreadFix implementations and consulting with organizations. This is a critical change that needs to be made, or a critical practice that needs to be adopted, and that differentiates between the organizations that really struggle getting their application security programs to make progress versus the ones that start to make headway. So now that we've looked at both the requirements management process, from the security requirements management process, as well as the vulnerability management process, let's take a look at how combining the two can offer a lot of value for organizations.
Okay, and I will illustrate the integration in SDLMents now. You know, one of the reasons we built the integration with ThreadFix is that we got the request, the demand from a number of our customers. So we see big companies seeing the value of this integration, and we see the value of it as well. So I'll blaze through kind of the setup steps, and then at the end you can see kind of the power of using SDLMents and ThreadFix together with the integration. So this is a picture of the SDLMents homepage. Right from the homepage, you kind of click that gear settings button and go to setup and integration there. Next slide. So this is where we add the connections. You first need to kind of connect it to to SDLMents, so SDLMents knows where to find ThreadFix online. You can see I already have an app scan integration there. It's one of the tools we support. So you just click that button to add a security tool connection, and then you start filling in the credentials. So I went to our ThreadFix instance and generated a secret API key there that you then enter into SDLMents along with the server address, and you know, you can name it ThreadFix and just click a button to move on. Then you have the ThreadFix connection established there in the list of integrations for SDLMents. But then the next step is that you have to actually add it to the project. So this is kind of a project view here. You can see it's organized into different phases: requirements, architecture and design, and development, and where we have a task list there. But you go up to the top of the project. The project page there, and click the integration button to add the actual integration to the project. And that window that's up front pops up where, you know, if there are no reports, you can add one. This is the security tool integrations, and you just click that to add a report. And then you select ThreadFix among the other ones that we support. And then you fill in kind of all the details, how you want it to play out. So you select, you have to fill in here the application name as it appears in ThreadFix and the team name as it appears in ThreadFix, so we know which project to link to. You can set up whether you want it to sync automatically, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. In this example, I have it selected manually, so you can import those results manually. Also, near the bottom, you can see, you can define the behavior based on the results. So for each task, if you get a fail or partial pass or pass, you can decide whether you want SDLMents to mark the task as done, or leave it unchanged, or mark it as incomplete. So we have you know, some automation options there. Once that's done, within the project page, the integration will show up. For a manual import, I have that button there on the right that says import, where I can click that, and it will work for a bit and mark it as complete, and the import will be done. Had I set up an automatic sync, that's where you would click to go and you know, set up or change the automatic synchronization options. So once that's actually integrated, then you can start enjoying the results for the project. So you can see in this example, the task list, we have, this is an expanded view. Normally it's a collapsed view, so you don't see the, you know, detailed information about the status of the validation. But you click on one of those verification flags if there is a mapping, and you can see the detailed information. In this example, for task 21, it's a partial pass with ThreadFix, and you can go down the line. If there is a mapping to of the results from ThreadFix, then that will show up there and flag it as you know, fail, partial pass, or pass. And now here we can see the real benefit of integrating ThreadFix with SDLMents on the next slide. So what happens without ThreadFix? If you set up multiple integrations within SDLMents, for the different scanner tools. You know, you can get conflicting results, as in this example. You know, we had a partial pass with check marks and a fail with app scan. So that's where we really like, and we think our customers really like, the vulnerability consolidation feature that Dan talked about in ThreadFix. So ThreadFix can intelligently handle all those mappings. What we see is, you know, there's a number of different scanners on the market. Companies want to reduce their risk by employing multiple scanners because they all kind of have different findings. They all, you know, address different threats. There is a lot of overlap, obviously, but companies find that they want to, you know, reduce their risk by using multiple scanners. And ThreadFix, if you're using ThreadFix to manage those multiple scanners, basically in SD Elements, you only have to set up one integration. Set up one integration with ThreadFix, and then ThreadFix can manage all the multiple scanners and, you know, intelligently consolidate all those findings, which we think is great, and our customers do too. And so the last thing for us is reporting results. So we have some automatic report generation tools in SD Elements. In this example, we can you know, automatically create a compliance report for HIPAA, which you just kind of do a one-click on that, and you get a compliance report in either PDF format or HTML format. And you can see, you know, for each section of the compliance specification, line by line, you can see if it's, you know, complete by the developers, and if there is a mapping in a validation tool, you can see the verification status of those requirements from the compliance. So it's very easy in SD Elements to automatically generate a compliance report, or for, you know, other regulations like NIST, like SOX, like COPPA, a number of lists that you know, you can find out from some of the materials on our website. So that's you know, another benefit of setting up the integrations within SD Elements is having that tracking and easy compliance reports. So in summary, and you know, I'll call on Dan as well to comment. You know, SD Elements 4 manages security requirements across the entire software development lifecycle. You know, as we said a number of times in this webinar, you know, we're trying to shift left and address those vulnerabilities as early as possible in the software development cycle to reduce risk and reduce costs. So these scalable automation capabilities help us do that and result in more secure applications that cost less to develop. The automation capabilities in SD Elements, along with the automation capabilities in ThreadFix, and the integration of ThreadFix with SD Elements. So I'll throw it back to Dan to kind of give his thoughts for the summary.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you summed it up great, and this is a fantastic way to move things to the left. You know, again, with ThreadFix being in there to make sense of all these data feeds that you're getting from these different testing activities, and I think it's really powerful to be able to see on the requirement side what concerns you have up front, and then to be able to cross that with the testing that you've done to identify what have we been successful with, what do we still need to continue testing, and where have we run into problems. I think you know, giving you the ability to link that requirements management process of what you want to see and that vulnerability management you know, at the tail end of the testing process to see what did we find or where were we unsuccessful. Being able to see both of those views provides a really an end-to-end perspective about how your application security program is working. And I think that's really exciting and very powerful as organizations look to mature their application security programs. Now we'll open things up to questions. If you'd like to use the question feature, that would be fantastic. And let's see, the first question here. The question is, will slides be available? If so, yeah, I think we've got a stray confidential in there in the slides, and so we will look to get that removed. But yeah, slides and this recording will be available here shortly. Usually we get it within a day or so, and sometimes a little faster than that, depending on what the conversion looks like. So yeah, this will be available, and we'll follow up with everyone who attended, as well as folks who may have missed, with a link where people can get to that if you want to review what we talked about here today, or if you want to share with a colleague who couldn't make it. Next question, what's the main difference or advantage between ThreadFix and the other defect management tools such as HPE, Application Lifecycle Manager, etc.? And so I think those are two, ThreadFix and the application, or the defect management tools are I see as two different classes of tools. ThreadFix is really targeted at the security team and is set up specifically to receive data feeds from the types of things you're doing in your security program. So if you're doing static testing with one or more tools, if you're doing dynamic testing with one or more tools, if you're doing interactive testing, but also incorporating manual testing, third-party reviews, all these different things that you may be doing. And so the consumer or the user of ThreadFix is typically primarily the application security team and the folks responsible for application security. The defect management tools like Jira and HP Alm, those are really targeted at developers, and they have features and capabilities to the types of tagging and reporting, and to be used in these sprints and whatnot that development teams are using. And so really I see there being two different consumers of these things, and at least in the case of ThreadFix, again, ThreadFix is squarely targeted at, typically the application security team. Occasionally we see organizations that will give developers accounts on ThreadFix. Those are typically security representatives from a team, or they are, tech leads for a team or something like that. But from a ThreadFix perspective, we really prefer to take these vulnerabilities and transition them to the defect tracking tools. And again, it's that allows each constituency to get the type of view into their workload that they need. And again, the ThreadFix integration with these tools allows for that to happen. Shane, I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on how you see different groups, between development and application security using SD elements, and as well as y'all's integrations with the application lifecycle management tools.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can echo some of the comments you made. I mean, SD Elements is also a tool where, kind of the main interface is the security team. And, a question we often get asked is, how is the development team receptive to this? It seems like it adds a lot of, work for the development teams. But in general, it's the security team that's actually managing the tool and, kind of prioritizing the requirements, setting up the integrations, and then SD Elements pushes the task into the development tools that they're used to using, so they don't have to change their development process. And so kind of what we find is that, making it easier for them, providing the education for the developers, providing the how-tos, kind of, breaks down some of those barriers between, requirements management or the security team and the development team, which is always helpful.
Excellent. Now I've got a question about how we associate projects in SD Elements with ThreadFix. And so I can speak on the ThreadFix side. ThreadFix has the concept of applications, which is something you're scanning repeatedly over time. And I believe right now, Shane, that is how you associate an application in ThreadFix with a project in SD Elements. Is that a fair way to characterize how that communication is working right now?
Yeah, that's right. So within each project in SD Elements, you can select a different application in ThreadFix for association. There was a screenshot that I kind of blazed through as part of the presentation, but I set it up myself. I'm just a marketing guy, but I was able to set up all those screenshots myself, and it was pretty easy. I just defined the root directory for the ThreadFix instance, and then filled in the application name and filled in the team name, and then it was all connected. So I found it pretty easy.
Excellent. And I know in certain environments where, in certain environments, I know we've talked to folks where the way that they're scanning programs are run, and so the way that they manage applications in ThreadFix doesn't line up directly with security or SD Elements projects, and that's something that we've talked to some folks about, and we're working to figure out how to provide a little bit more flexibility in the way that those constructs in the different systems are attached to one another's. Next question is there a way to associate defects created in the application lifecycle management tools from ThreadFix with the requirements added to lifecycle management tools from SD Elements? The typical workflow that we see there is you have a requirement, on the front end you'd have a requirement created by SD Elements that says you need to protect against XYZ type of problem by using these best practices. And typically what we see is that would be created, sent to the developers, and then closed out as the developers felt that they were successful with that. And then later on, if you do testing that identifies that that security requirement was not successfully followed, then a new defect was created, or it gets created by ThreadFix. And so if you wanted to associate those two defects in the application lifecycle management system, that is something that you, depending on the lifecycle management system, would do on that side. But again, with the stuff that we've seen, it's typically there's a first wave of tasks that are created in these application lifecycle management system associated with security requirements, and then a second wave, again, hopefully much smaller, created when vulnerabilities are identified. I don't believe we have a way to automate the association of those requirements failures at the current time, but that certainly that would certainly be very interesting data. If you wanted to see that data, you should be able to, I would imagine, pull that from SD Elements, because they were, they have seen both the creation of the requirement as well as the results of the testing that indicated that the requirement was not successfully followed. So if you wanted to get that data, I think you could probably get that from SD Elements. Shane, I'll open it up. You can certainly weigh in on that, but that's the way that I think I would see getting access to that data.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think the only thing I would add is that, in general, ALM tools are where all your kind of work items are managed, whether they be, requirements pushed from SD Elements or bugs found in findings. In SD Elements, we have kind of a two-way integration with ALM tools, where in SD Elements, when tasks or security requirements are marked as done in JIRA, that can get fed back to SD Elements. So if the security analyst team is monitoring it, they can just see all the tasks being marked as done in SD Elements, and they don't have to go into JIRA. But in general, yeah, that's it's kind of as the way Dan described that workflow.
Excellent. Next question: are you seeing companies identifying threats during threat modeling as flaws tracked in ThreadFix or as design requirements in SD Elements? And maybe Shane, do you want to talk a little bit about how SD Elements can help with threat modeling, and then I can talk about some of the things that we've seen in our experience with different ThreadFix customers?
Yeah, sure. So SD Elements does help with threat modeling. So the way we like to talk about it is to kind of distinguish between two types of threats. There are domain agnostic threats and domain-based threats. So domain-based threats are, are threat models generated, from the business logic or, the problems and threats specific to an application and its features. Whereas domain-agnostic threats are kind of threats related to infrastructure and technologies and protocols that are, common among all applications. So what SD Elements can do, we can actually automate the threat model for the domain-agnostic threats. Which gives the security analyst team a lot more time to devote to the important part, which is the domain-based threats, based on the business logic and the features of the application. So we do do that part of the threat modeling in SD Elements. When the security analysts complete their domain-based threat models, they can actually take all those requirements and enter them in as custom tasks into SD Elements, and kind of track them through the development lifecycle that way. So that's kind of where SD Elements contributes to the threat modeling process.
Excellent. And what we see is in organizations where they have like an SD elements deployed, where that is, where the security requirements and the threat modeling processes are very closely tied. That's, again, the workflow that Shane described is how that is typically handled. In other organizations where they don't have an SD elements deployed, we have seen a number of organizations that are tracking threats in ThreadFix, so those threats can be flowed to to Jira or another application lifecycle management tool and tracked. And so really it's just a question of, well, one of the things that we've learned in the past 6 years deploying ThreadFix for different organizations is everybody runs their security program a little bit in a little bit of a different way, and in large organizations they run their security programs potentially different, between offices or across business units. And so, we've seen both approaches, and it's really just a question for an organization of what technologies do you have deployed and what is your workflow in the business look like for how you're gathering requirements, how you're doing threat modeling, and how those flow through the organization to the different stakeholders. And the follow-up there is, it doesn't matter as long as those threats are tracked somewhere and make it into the ALM tools. Exactly, right? And just like how vulnerabilities are things that security teams care about, but ultimately that development teams need to know about to fix, it's that, it's making sure that those two stakeholders, both the development teams and the security teams, have a system where they know they can go and look up those various things. Next question is, how is this threat modeling different from Microsoft's way of threat modeling and the newly released IAN's threat modeling toolkit? And I'm not specifically familiar with the IAN's threat modeling toolkit. That's not something that I have used myself yet. Shane, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about the difference between what you all do and both, either or both of the Microsoft approach to threat modeling or Microsoft's threat modeling tool?
Yeah, I'm not well versed in the IANs or the Microsoft method actually myself, but I can take an action to get back to the poster of the question with a list of differences.
Very cool. Excellent. Do we have any other questions? These are great questions, folks. Keep them coming. Okay, so the question is, can you talk a little bit more about what we're doing to align apps in ThreadFix and projects in SD elements? So I can talk a little bit about that just from what we've seen on our end, and basically that's something that is in progress right now to figure out a way to better handle situations where the SD elements concept of a project is different than the ThreadFix concept of an application. And there's, we've looked at a couple of different options, that we're basically using components of ThreadFix to potentially, post-combine the results across applications or something like that. So we're working with a couple of organizations where they've noted this issue. Unfortunately, don't have a lot of specifics right now, but it is something that we've noticed in a couple of environments. And so we're working with folks to figure out, like, what's the best way to handle this, to best integrate the requirements management that you see in the SD elements and potential parity differences with the way that assets are managed in the vulnerability management in ThreadFix. Okay, any other questions? I see a question about sharing that threat modeling comparison. We'll make sure to make that available to folks. Any other questions from folks that are out there? Going once, going twice, sold. Well, thank you all very much. I want to say, extend a big thanks to all of the attendees who came today. Really appreciate it. To all the folks that asked questions, also thank you for that. It's always great to see the questions coming out of folks that are implementing this or that are considering implementing this. I want to extend my thanks to Shane for coming on. And Shane, I don't know if you have any kind of closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to take part in this webinar. I think the combination of ThreadFix and SD elements is a very powerful one. That certainly help our customers solve a number of issues in their workflow, and so I'm looking forward to following up on some of this stuff.
Perfect. And I think there is a question in here. Oh, never mind. Okay, perfect. Thank you all very much, and we will get the recording and the follow-ups that we've talked about here pretty shortly, and you'll check your emails for that. And thank you all very much.